The biting wind whipped across the barren plains, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant snow-capped peaks. 60 women, clad in their dark, practical uniforms, huddled close, their faces etched with a desperate mix of terror and nascent triumph. Their breaths plumed white, a fleeting testament to their escape. This was not the freedom they had been promised, but it was freedom nonetheless. Tonight, they had broken free from Iran. Shirin Azadi had always known where she belonged. From her earliest memories in the tree-lined avenues of Tehran's Vanak district, a neighborhood where the city's pulse often beat with a deceptive calm, she understood order. Her parents, university professors, were not zealots, but they instilled in her a deep reverence for community, for the shared destiny of their Vatan. Shirin, however, felt a pull towards something more tangible, more demanding. At 18, after her concours exams, while her peers debated university majors, she made a decision that surprised many. She joined the Basij, not the rough, uneducated boys from the poorer districts, but a newly formed, specialized unit for educated women, Guru-e-Banuvan-e Hossein, Hussein's ladies' group. She was drawn to the discipline, the sense of purpose, the promise of guarding Iran's integrity, its namus. Her training was rigorous, not merely ideological indoctrination, but practical physical education. She learned hand-to-hand combat, riot control techniques, marksmanship with a Kalashnikov, and the meticulous protocols of internal security. Her days were a blur of drills at the Basij Garargah in eastern Tehran, followed by evenings of study and prayer. She excelled, her natural leadership skills quickly recognized. By 25, Shirin commanded her own platoon. At 30, she was a captain, overseeing a unit of 60 dedicated women, many of whom had joined with the same earnest belief she once held, that they were protecting the purity of their society, safeguarding its moral compass. Her duties were varied. Sometimes it was crowd control during official parades, ensuring decorum. Other times, it involved patrolling public parks, shopping centers, or even university campuses, politely but firmly reminding women about their hijab. There were moments of genuine connection, women nodding in understanding, thanking her for upholding the values they believed in. And there were moments of quiet resistance, defiant glances, whispered curses, which she dismissed as youthful rebellion, a lack of understanding. The regime, she genuinely believed, was a divinely guided shield against the corrupting influences of the West, a bulwark preserving their unique Shiite identity. This was not oppression, it was protection. This was not control, it was guidance. Her personal life was equally ordered, equally fulfilling. She married Reza, a kind-eyed general practitioner she met through mutual friends. He understood her commitment to the Basij, though he held a more pragmatic, less ideologically fervent view of the world. Their apartment in Vanak was a sanctuary of calm, filled with books, the scent of her mother's gourmet sabzi on Fridays, and the soft laughter of their daughter, Lala. Lala was 6 years old, a bright, curious child with her mother's sharp intelligence and her father's gentle spirit. Shirin often found herself watching Lala play, a profound love blooming in her chest, a love that she felt was an extension of her commitment to Iran. Everything she did, she told herself, was for Lala, for the future of a pure, ordered Iran where her daughter could thrive. The Basij was not just a job. It was an integral part of her identity, her faith, her purpose. Every morning as she donned her uniform, she felt a surge of pride, a conviction that she was contributing to something greater than herself, something sacred. The weight of the uniform was a comfort, a second skin of righteousness. She remembered one evening sitting with Reza explaining her worldview. "You see, Reza Jan," she had said, "the Basij is the pulse of the revolution. We are the ones who connect with the people, who guide them. It's not about force, it's about understanding, about amar bimaruf wa nahi az munkar, enjoining good and forbidding wrong. We prevent chaos, we maintain the dignity of our women, the sanctity of our homes." Reza would listen patiently, his hand often resting on her arm. "Shirin," he would reply softly, "dignity comes from within, not from enforced cloth. And chaos is often born of too much control." She would dismiss his gentle protests with a wave of her hand, attributing it to his doctor's empathy, his exposure to suffering. She saw herself as a healer of society's ills, an antidote to moral decay. The Basij was the cure. Her 60 women, her Doktharan, her girls, were her instruments of healing, her brigade of guardians. They mirrored her dedication, their faces often reflecting her own steely resolve during drills, their movements echoing her precision on patrols. They were a family, forged in shared belief and discipline, and Shirin was their unwavering madar. The heat of the afternoon sun pressed down on Azadi Square, a suffocating blanket even in late Aban, 1401. The air buzzed, not with the usual hum of Tehran traffic, but with a visceral, rising current of anger. Thousands had gathered, their chants echoing off the concrete canyons of the city, a relentless rhythm. Zan, Zendagi, Azadi, woman, life, freedom. Shirin's unit, 60 strong, was deployed directly onto the square, forming a human barricade near the monument. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a familiar thrum of adrenaline. But today, it carried a discordant note. There was an edge to this protest, a raw desperation she hadn't felt before. She stood at the front, her gaze sweeping over the crowd. Her helmet felt heavy, the riot shield cumbersome. Her Kalashnikov was slung across her back, a silent, menacing presence. Her orders were clear: contain, disperse, no direct engagement unless provoked. But the faces in the crowd were different today. Younger, more women. Girls, really. One face caught her eye. A girl no older than Lala, perhaps 10 or 11, her dark eyes wide with a terror that mirrored Lala's when she had a bad dream. The girl was clutching her mother's hand, squeezed between two men in the surging crowd. Shirin's stomach clenched. A flicker of unease, quickly suppressed. This was her duty. And then, the lines blurred. From behind her position, a different element moved in. Not Basij. These were IRGC, their black uniforms stark, their demeanor aggressive, their faces hard. They moved with a chilling efficiency, pushing deeper into the crowd, not containing, but attacking. Shirin heard the sharp cracks of batons, the cries of pain. A chilling shriek ripped through the air. The crowd surged back, a wave of bodies pressing against Shirin's unit. Fear, thick and palpable, emanated from the protesters. Shirin saw the young girl's mother fall, losing her grip on the child. The girl was swept away, her small body swallowed by the heaving mass. "Advance! Push them back! Use force if necessary!" The shout came from behind, a guttural roar from an IRGC officer. A man with a scarred face Shirin recognized from joint drills, Major Cameron. His eyes, devoid of any discernible humanity, fixed on Shirin's unit. "Captain Azadi, move your women forward. Clear this filth." Shirin hesitated. Her orders were to contain, not to charge into a terrified, unarmed crowd. "Major, my orders are to hold position to prevent further escalation." "Your orders are what I say they are, Basiji dog." Cameron snarled, stepping closer, his face inches from hers. "Fire warning shots. Make them run." Shirin's hand instinctively went to her sidearm. She looked at her unit. Her 60 women, their faces a mix of confusion and mounting dread, looked to her for guidance. Private Zara Karimi, a young recruit barely out of high school, stood directly to Shirin's left. Zara was trembling, her eyes wide. Cameron saw her hesitation. He lunged. A sickening thud echoed as his closed fist slammed into Zara's helmet. The young woman staggered, her riot shield clattering to the ground. "Are you deaf, girl? Fire, now!" Cameron shrieked, his voice laced with venom. He raised his hand again, aiming for Zara's face. Something snapped inside Shirin. This was not the order she knew. This was not protection. This was pure, unadulterated brutality. This was her girl, her unit, her responsibility. Without thinking, Shirin stepped forward, placing herself squarely between Major Cameron and Zara. "Stop, Major. She is my soldier." Shirin's voice was a low growl, barely audible above the din, but it cut through the air like a knife. Cameron paused, his arm still raised, his eyes burning with a cold fury, now locked onto Shirin. "Are you defying me, Captain?" he hissed. "Do you forget who gives the orders here?" He pointed to a small cluster of protesters, amongst whom Shirin could still see the terrified young girl, now crying silently, pressed against a wall. "That one, the little harlot. She thinks she can stand against the Republic? Go, beat her. Set an example for your pathetic Basiji bitches." Shirin's gaze followed his finger. The girl, no longer a faceless protester, was Lala. Her Lala. Her heart lurched, a sickening lurch that felt like a betrayal of her own blood. Her hand, without conscious thought, went into her uniform pocket. Her fingers closed around the smooth, cool wood of the bala bowl, the tiny bird Lala had carved and given her that morning. A good luck charm. She could feel the delicate curve of its wing, the smooth head. "Fly, Mama, fly," Lala had whispered. Shirin looked from the bala ball in her pocket to the sobbing girl, then back at Kamran's sneering face. The pure, unadulterated evil in his eyes, his complete disregard for human dignity, shattered decades of carefully constructed belief. This was not faith. This was not order. This was savagery. Her body felt cold. Her throat was dry. A choked whisper escaped her lips. No. The sound was barely audible, but in the sudden, charged silence between them, it roared. Kamran's face twisted in disbelief, then rage. "What did you say?" he spat, stepping closer. Shirin stood her ground. Her grip tightened around the balabal. The little wooden bird, symbol of innocence and freedom, felt like a lifeline. "I said no," Shirin repeated, louder this time, her voice shaking but resolute. The decision was made. The line was drawn. The world had shifted on its axis. The weight of Major Kamran's contempt felt heavier than her entire uniform. His eyes, narrowed to slits, promised retribution. "You will regret this, Captain Azadi," he had hissed, turning away, leaving her standing amidst the chaos. The protesters were still screaming. Her 60 women, frozen, had witnessed her defiance. Zara, the young recruit, was looking at her with a mixture of awe and terror. The balabal in her pocket felt like a brand, a burning mark of her betrayal, not to the regime, but to her own former self. Returning to the Basij Gararga that evening was an act of pure willpower. Every step felt like walking through thick mud. The chatter of her women, usually a comforting hum, was stifled, replaced by a tense, nervous silence. She could feel their eyes on her, worried, questioning. Back in her small Spartan office, the walls adorned with portraits of the supreme leader and solemn revolutionary slogans, she removed her helmet. Her head pounded. The metallic taste of adrenaline still lingered on her tongue. She took the balabal from her pocket, placing it gently on her desk. It seemed so fragile, so out of place in this room of grim resolve. The official report on the Azadi Square protest would be damning. Shireen knew it. Her insubordination, her public defiance of an IRGC major, was an unforgivable offense. It wasn't just a career-ending move. It was a life-ending one. She could see Evan Prison looming in her mind, a dark, inescapable shadow. But the strange thing was, the fear that should have crippled her was replaced by a cold, clear clarity. The regime she had served, the ideals she had cherished, were a lie. They were hollow, covered in the blood of innocence, defended by the brutality of men like Kamran. She looked at the official portraits, the stern, unwavering gazes. For years, she had seen conviction. Tonight, she saw only hypocrisy. She remembered the oath she had taken, to protect the people, to defend Islam, to uphold justice. What justice was there in beating a child? What protection was there in brutalizing one's own? The carefully constructed edifice of her belief system crumbled, brick by agonizing brick. Each memory of a rigid decree, each instance of enforced obedience, now resonated with a discordant truth. Reza's gentle warnings, which she had so easily dismissed, echoed in her mind. Chaos is often born of too much control. He had been right, all along. The faces of her unit flashed before her eyes. Zara's terror, the confusion in the eyes of others. They had trusted her. They had followed her, and she had nearly led them to participate in barbarism. She was their commander, their Madar. Her first duty was to them, to their safety, to their honor, not to Kamran, not to a system that consumed its own with such casual cruelty. The decision coalesced, solidifying with a chilling certainty. She couldn't stay. She couldn't let her girls stay. They were all complicit now, simply by witnessing her refusal. The regime would not differentiate. They would all be punished. Her mind raced. 60 women, all trained, all loyal, and all in imminent danger. She would not let them become fodder for a regime she no longer recognized. She would not let them be broken, as she herself had nearly been. The idea, initially a desperate whisper, grew into a roaring imperative. They had to escape. All of them, in a single night. It was an insane thought, a suicidal proposition, but the alternative was far worse. Surrender, betrayal, inaction. Shirin knew the Basij Gararga inside out. She knew the patrol routes, the shift changes, the storage facilities. She knew the women under her command, their strengths and weaknesses, their unspoken fears. This was their only chance. She picked up the balabol. Its smooth wood felt warm against her palm. Lila's innocent face swam before her eyes. Her daughter deserved a world free from this kind of terror, this kind of lie. Shirin had to secure that world for her, and for her other daughters, her 60 Basij women, who now, whether they knew it yet or not, depended entirely on her. She had to act. Tonight, the plan formed in Shirin's mind, a chaotic kaleidoscope of desperate possibilities, slowly sharpening into a perilous but coherent strategy. It was not enough to save herself. She carried the burden of 60 souls, 60 young women whose fates were now inexplicably linked to her moment of defiance. She knew they would all be interrogated, perhaps tortured, for what she had done. Her obligation extended beyond mere leadership. It was a moral imperative, a fierce, maternal protectiveness that eclipsed all else. She summoned her 2 most trusted lieutenants, Farishte and Zara, not the young recruit, but a seasoned sergeant with a quiet strength. Both were in their late 20s, efficient, utterly loyal to Shirin, and had served under her for years. Their meeting was clandestine, held late at night in a disused equipment shed at the far end of the Gararga grounds, shielded from surveillance. The air was thick with the scent of oil and dust. A single bare bulb cast long, dancing shadows. "We have to leave," Shirin said, her voice low, devoid of emotion. A stark statement that hung heavy in the air. She detailed the incident with Major Kamran, omitting no brutal detail, emphasizing the threat not just to her, but to every woman in their unit. She described the look in Kamran's eyes, the casual cruelty, the regime's complete disregard for its own. Farishta's face, usually composed, paled. Zara's jaw tightened, her knuckles white where she gripped the edge of a workbench. "But Sarvan," Farishte whispered, using Shirin's rank, "where would we go? And all of us? 60 women?" Her voice trembled with the enormity of the proposition. "There is no us anymore, Farishte," Shirin countered, her gaze unwavering. "There is only what we do now. If we stay, we are dead. Or worse, we become like him. We become the very thing we swore to fight against." She laid out the stark truth. They were all compromised, their loyalty irrevocably tainted by her act of rebellion. The regime would ensure they broke, one by one. Zara, ever pragmatic, spoke next. "Resources, weapons, vehicles. We know the routes through Kurdistan. My uncle's cousin runs a smuggling operation near Piranchar. He might help, for a price." A flicker of hope, however small, ignited in Shirin's chest. This was why she trusted Zara. The plan began to take shape. They would need uniforms for disguise, enough for every woman. They would need money for the border crossing, for bribes. Shirin had saved a considerable sum over the years, a nest egg for Lala's future, now repurposed for an uncertain freedom. They would need provisions, dried fruit, bread, water, basic medical supplies. They knew the armory codes, the vehicle rosters. Their training, once a tool of the regime, would become their greatest asset. The biggest challenge was rallying the other 57 women. Fear was a potent weapon. Whispers could betray them. Shirin decided on a phased approach. First, identify the most disaffected, the ones who had shown cracks in their belief, the ones who had witnessed the Azadi Square brutality and returned with a similar unease. These would be their first converts, their inner circle. Over the next few days, Shirin held individual, discreet conversations. She spoke of duty, not to the regime, but to their shared humanity. She spoke of the regime's darkening path, of the erosion of true Islamic values in favor of raw power. She spoke of the future, a future where they might live with dignity, not as tools of oppression. Slowly, agonizingly, conviction spread. The younger recruits, still reeling from the events at Azadi Square, were surprisingly quick to embrace the idea. The older, more jaded soldiers, weary of the increasing absurdity of their orders, also came around. A silent network formed within the unit, a conspiracy of hope and fear. Sheeran emphasized secrecy above all else. One leak, one suspicious glance, and it was all over. Each woman had to weigh the terrifying risk against the crushing certainty of a bleak future under the regime. The choice was clear, stark, and terrifying. They settled on a date, the night of the next full moon, 4 days from now. A night when the patrols would be slightly less vigilant, trusting the natural light to expose any illicit activity. It also allowed them enough time to gather necessary provisions without drawing undue attention. Sheeran used her authority as commander to issue orders for a special night exercise in a remote mountainous area near the Iraqi border, a plausible cover for a unit of their type. This would allow them to take vehicles, weapons, and provisions without raising immediate alarms. She meticulously forged documents, requisitioning fuel, food supplies, and even extra ammunition. Every detail was accounted for, every contingency considered. The weight of 60 lives pressed down on her, a constant crushing pressure. But beneath it, a new kind of resolve, cold and hard as steel, began to form. This was not just an escape, it was an act of profound, collective defiance. The moon hung high and full, casting an eerie silver light across the barren landscape surrounding Tehran. The air was crisp, carrying the promise of winter. 60 women, dressed in standard Basij field uniforms, moved with practiced silence through the back alleys of the Gararga. Their faces were grim, illuminated occasionally by the faint glow of a mobile phone screen, quickly doused. Sheeran led the way, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Every shadow seemed to hold a lurking guard. Every distant bark of a dog sent a jolt of ice through her veins. Their first objective, the vehicle depot. Under the guise of their special exercise, Sheeran had already requisitioned 3 covered transport trucks, usually used for moving supplies. They moved in small groups, merging silently near the depot's rear entrance. Farishte and Zara worked quickly, disabling the security camera, their movements fluid and practiced. The gate squeaked open. Inside, the cavernous depot smelled of diesel and stale oil. Sheeran's women quickly loaded crates of food, water bottles, medical kits, and extra ammunition, all requisitioned earlier. They also secured several rifles and sidearms, far more than strictly necessary for a standard exercise. These were for survival. This was for a fight, if it came to that. The engines rumbled to life. The exhaust fumes filled the cold air. Sheeran took the wheel of the lead truck, Zara beside her, scanning their route on a smuggled GPS device. Farishte commanded the second truck, a younger lieutenant, Mina, the third. The trucks peeled out of the depot one by one, merging onto a deserted side road. The city lights began to recede in the rearview mirrors, shrinking into a distant glow. The highway stretched ahead, a black ribbon under the moonlight. Sheeran drove with fierce concentration, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. The women in the back were silent, their fear a palpable presence in the enclosed space. Their route was circuitous, designed to avoid major checkpoints. They took unpaved roads, dirt tracks that rattled the trucks, kicking up clouds of dust that shrouded their progress. A distant set of headlights appeared in their rearview mirror. Sheeran's breath hitched. A patrol. "Lights off," she whispered, her voice tight. Zara flicked a switch. The trucks plunged into darkness, relying on the moonlight and Sheeran's memory of the road. The approaching vehicle passed them, a dark blur of an IRGC Jeep, its occupants seemingly oblivious to the 3 hulking shadows parked on the shoulder. Sheeran let out a shaky breath. "Keep moving," she ordered, her voice regaining its steel. Hours passed. The trucks chugged through the undulating plains, the landscape growing more rugged, more desolate. The cold intensified. Their target was a remote, abandoned bag near Urmia, a prearranged rendezvous point where they would ditch the vehicles and begin their trek on foot into the Zagros Mountains. Just as dawn approached, a sharp bang echoed from the second truck. A tire. Farishta's voice, tight with panic, crackled over the radio. "Sarvan, we have a flat. Front left, completely shredded." Sheeran slammed on the brakes, the lead truck skidding slightly on the gravel. "Everyone out, quick, change it." This was a military operation, not a civilian road trip. All 60 women knew how to change a tire. They swarmed the truck, wrenches clanking, spare tire rolling. The cold wind bit at their exposed hands. A sense of urgency, of deep vulnerability, pressed down on them. They were out in the open, exposed. The first golden streaks of dawn were already painting the eastern sky. 10 minutes later, as the spare was secured and the women scrambled back into the trucks, a faint sound reached Sharon's ears. A low growl, like an engine, or maybe a distant drone. Her blood ran cold. "Move! Get in! Now!" she barked. The women scrambled, some still struggling with their gear. Sharon floored the accelerator, the engine roaring to life. The 3 trucks lurched forward, leaving a cloud of dust and the discarded shredded tire behind. She pushed the trucks harder, the suspension groaning over the rough terrain. The sound, whatever it was, seemed to recede, a narrow escape. They reached the bag just as the sun broke over the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues. The old garden, long abandoned, was overgrown with thorny bushes and skeletal fruit trees. They drove the trucks into a hidden ravine, covering them with tarpaulins and branches. No one spoke. Their faces were drawn with exhaustion, fear, and a desperate resolve. Now, the real challenge began. The mountains. The Zagros Range loomed ahead, a formidable wall of jagged peaks and deep valleys. The air here was thin, sharp with the scent of pine and damp earth. Sharon gathered her women. Their faces, no longer hidden by darkness, showed their fear, their absolute reliance on her. "From this point," Sharon announced, her voice strong despite her own fatigue, "we are ghosts. No talking, no lights. We move as one." The women shed their heavy uniforms, revealing layers of civilian clothes beneath, practical, dark garments for movement. They kept their boots, their weapons, and their packs. Sharon held the balabol in her hand, feeling its smooth wood. Her daughter's face. She whispered a silent prayer. The ascent was brutal. The slopes were steep, covered in loose scree that shifted treacherously underfoot. The cold was bone deep, seeping into their muscles. They moved in a single, winding line. Sharon at the front, Zara at the rear, pushing, encouraging, ensuring no one fell behind. The thin air burned in their lungs. Each step was a battle against gravity, against exhaustion, against the gnawing fear that whispered from the shadows. A young woman, Private Elam, stumbled on a loose rock. Her ankle twisted with a sickening crunch. She cried out, a sharp, involuntary gasp of pain. Sharon was beside her in an instant. Elam's face was white, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I can't, Sarvan. I can't move it." "We don't leave anyone behind," Sharon stated, her voice firm. Zara quickly fashioned a makeshift splint from a tent pole and medical tape. 2 other women, strong and steady, volunteered to support Elam, one on each side, sharing her weight. Their pace slowed, but their resolve did not waver. Sharon looked at Elam, her eyes full of a new understanding. This was the cost of freedom. This was the bond of true sisterhood. They continued their climb through the day, moving in and out of the sparse forest, navigating treacherous ravines. The sun beat down, then disappeared behind heavy clouds. A sudden gust of wind, biting and cold, swept through the valley. Then came the snow. Not a gentle dusting, but a sudden, violent blizzard. Flakes, thick and heavy, began to fall, swirling around them, reducing visibility to mere feet. The ground quickly became slick and treacherous. "Find cover! Now!" Sharon yelled, her voice barely audible above the howling wind. They scrambled into a small overhang, a shallow cave in the rock face, huddling together for warmth. The snow piled up at the entrance, sealing them in a frigid tomb. The temperature plummeted. Shivers ran through the group, uncontrollable, bone-rattling. Sharon checked on Elam, then on the other women. Their faces were pale, lips blue. Hypothermia was a silent killer. This was their lowest point. Despair gnawed at them. Whispers of regret, of wanting to go back, began to spread. Sharon knew she had to act. She gathered the women around her, pulling them close. "Look at me," she commanded, her voice cutting through the sounds of the storm and their chattering teeth. "We are here. We are together. We chose this. We did not choose to be beaten, to be lied to be forced into cruelty. We chose freedom, and we will fight for it. Every one of us. No one gets left behind. We are Banuvani Hossein no longer. We are Banuvani Azadi, women of freedom." She pulled out the balabol. "My daughter gave me this. She told me to fly. We will fly. Together." The small wooden bird, held aloft in her hand, seemed to absorb some of the despair, replacing it with a fragile, renewed determination. The women looked at each other, their eyes meeting in the dim light. The whispers died. A shared resolve began to solidify once more. The snowstorm raged for hours. Then, as suddenly as it began, it tapered off, leaving behind a world transformed into a pristine, white silence. They emerged from the cave, blinking in the pale moonlight reflecting off the snow. The air was impossibly cold, crisp and clean. They pressed on, their boots crunching through the fresh powder. The going was harder now, their pace agonizingly slow. They heard the dogs first, a faint baying in the distance, growing steadily closer. Border patrols. Sheeran's blood ran cold. They were close to the border, but not yet across. "Fan out! Silent movement! Stay low!" she ordered. They moved like shadows, melting into the snow-covered rocks and sparse trees. The dogs barked, closer now, accompanied by the muffled shouts of men. Sheeran could make out the glint of flashlights sweeping across the terrain. They crawled on their bellies, their faces pressed into the freezing snow, hearts hammering against their ribs. The dogs were almost on them. One of the women, Private Nasrin, let out a small sob. Sheeran reached back, squeezing her arm. A silent command for composure. A flashlight beam swept over their position, just missing them. Sheeran could hear the heavy boots of the border guards, their voices close enough to discern words. Any sign? They must be close. They waited, frozen, barely breathing. The dogs barked frantically, their noses to the ground, sniffing, getting closer. Sheeran could hear their snuffling. One dog was almost on her, a black shape in the snow. Her hand instinctively went to her sidearm. She would not be caught. Not now. Not after all this. Then a distant whistle. A single, sharp blast. The border guards, as if on cue, began to pull back, their flashlights retreating, their dogs slowly silenced. A miracle, or a signal. Sheeran lifted her head, scanning the horizon. A faint, flickering light pulsed twice in the distance, from a rocky outcrop. Zara's contact. They pushed through the last, grueling stretch, fueled by a surge of desperate hope. The snow turned to slush as they descended into a hidden valley. The air grew warmer. They reached the base of the mountain, exhausted, bruised, but alive. A small, nondescript hut, barely visible against the dark rock, marked their destination. As they approached, a figure emerged. A man with a weathered face and kind eyes. Zara's uncle's cousin. "Welcome," he said simply, his voice low and calm. "You made it." 60 women collapsed onto the ground, some sobbing, some simply staring blankly into the night. Sheeran looked back at the imposing, dark silhouette of the Zagros Mountains, an invisible line separating two worlds. Iran was behind them. Freedom, however uncertain, lay ahead. The balabol was still clutched in her hand, a small, warm presence against the freezing cold. She had flown. They had flown. The small, nondescript hut was a haven of warmth and light after the brutal cold of the mountains. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of wood smoke and freshly brewed tea. The smuggler, a quiet, stoic man named Kava, ushered them in, his eyes surveying the exhausted, disheveled women with a paternal understanding. He had hot tea waiting, strong and sweet, and simple, wholesome bread. Sheeran felt the warmth seep into her frozen limbs, melting the ice that had encased her heart for days. The women, one by one, collapsed onto the sparse rugs and blankets Kaveh had laid out. Their faces, caked with dirt and streaked with tears, reflected a profound, almost dizzying relief. The endless tension that had gripped them for days finally began to ebb, leaving them weak and trembling. Elam, her sprained ankle throbbing, leaned against a wall, her eyes closed in exhaustion. Sheeran moved among them, offering what little comfort she could, a gentle touch on a shoulder, a shared, silent nod. The sounds of their soft murmurs, their quiet sobs, filled the small space. This was not the jubilant roar of victory, but the profound quiet of survival, of a deep exhale after holding one's breath for too long. Kava spoke little, but his actions conveyed everything. He offered them a place to rest, a brief respite before the next leg of their journey. "You are safe here for now," he told Sheeran, his voice gruff but kind. "No Iranian patrols dare cross this far. The Kurds will protect their own." He pointed to a faint winding path just outside the hut. "Beyond that ridge, the true border. Iraqi Kurdistan. They are expecting you." The sun was high when they finally moved again, their bodies stiff but spirits lighter. The walk to the ridge was short, barely a kilometer. As they crested the rise, a different landscape opened before them. The terrain was still mountainous, but there was a scattering of small stone houses in the valley below, a thin plume of smoke rising from one. A few children played in a dusty yard. A woman tended a small flock of sheep. It was a simple, ordinary scene. Yet to Shirin, it looked like paradise. A small contingent of Peshmerga soldiers, their uniforms distinctly different from the Basij, met them at the bottom of the ridge. Their faces were kind, welcoming. They spoke in Kurdish, but Keva translated their words of welcome, their offers of aid. This was it, the invisible line, the true freedom. Shirin looked back, one last time, at the formidable peaks that marked the border with Iran. She thought of Lale, of Reza. She had made a choice that would forever alter their lives. Her life, the lives of her 60 women. There was no turning back, only forward. The initial days in Iraqi Kurdistan were a blur of bureaucratic procedures, of endless forms and interviews in refugee camps near Suleymaniya. They were registered, their stories recorded, their identities verified. They were treated with dignity, respect, a stark contrast to the dehumanizing brutality they had fled. For the first time in years, Shirin felt her uniform, now shed and replaced with simple borrowed clothes, was no longer a cage. It was simply a memory. The women of her unit began to heal, both physically and emotionally. Elam's ankle mended. The haunted look in their eyes slowly faded, replaced by a cautious hope. Shirin watched them, her heart swelling with a fierce pride. They had endured. They had survived. They were not just soldiers anymore. They were survivors, witnesses. Her own healing was more complex. The ghost of Major Cameron, the memory of his snarling face, still haunted her dreams. But the bala bowl, kept safe in her pocket, was a constant reminder of why she had acted. She managed to contact Reza through Kava's network, a brief, tearful call. He was safe. Lala was safe. He was making arrangements to join her. The distance was agonizing, but the hope of reunion burned brightly. Shirin knew her new life would be fraught with challenges. She was a refugee, a defector, stripped of her rank, her status, her country, but she carried something far more valuable, her integrity, her 60 women, and the burning truth of what she had witnessed. She spent hours dictating her testimony to international aid workers, detailing the corruption, the brutality, the hypocrisy she had seen. Her words were not just her own. They were the collective voice of her unit, of all the silent sufferers she had left behind. She thought about the meaning of Azadi, her own surname. Freedom. It wasn't just an escape from a geographical boundary. It was an escape from a mental prison, a spiritual shackles. It was the freedom to speak, to choose, to be, to live with integrity. Shirin knew her fight was far from over. She would use her voice, her story, her experience to advocate for those still trapped, for those who dreamed of a night like hers. The past was a scar, but the future was a vast, open sky, waiting for her to truly fly. Would you have done the same? Tell me in the comments.